I was 29 when I found out my parents used the $72,000 inheritance my grandfather left me to fund my brother's tech startup. They didn't ask, they didn't explain. They simply called it a family decision. A decision I wasn't even invited to. Growing up, I was always the quiet one, the invisible one, the other child. My older brother Ryan was the golden boy, the one who won spelling bees and science fairs, the one who filled the house with awards, trophies, and praise. And me, I liked to draw. I liked to sew. I liked quiet mornings with a sketchbook and coffee. But that wasn't enough. Not in our house. My parents had made it clear from early on Ryan was going places. I was nice, but not exceptional. Not worth investing in. When Grandpa James passed away, it was devastating. He had been the only adult in my family who truly saw me. Every birthday, he gave me something handmade or thoughtful: a wooden box for my sewing supplies, a leather bound sketchbook, a signed letter from a local artist he'd met at the farmer's market who had seen my work. He understood me. And he believed in me. So when the lawyer read the will and announced that Grandpa had left me $72,000 specifically earmarked to support Elena's future creative endeavors, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: seen, valid, hopeful. That hope lasted exactly 3 weeks. I was in the kitchen when my mother casually mentioned that they had redirected the funds to help Ryan launch his tech startup. "You weren't really going to spend that on fabric and beads, right?" she said, pouring herself coffee like it was just another Wednesday. I couldn't breathe. "It was mine," I whispered. "Grandpa left that money for me." Dad barely looked up from his laptop. "We had to make a decision for the good of the family. Ryan has real potential, Elena. His project could change everything. For who I wanted to scream. For you. They didn't even see what they had done. They thought I would accept it like I always had. They thought I would disappear quietly again. But that day, something cracked, and what I did next, none of them saw coming. I don't think anyone ever said it out loud, but it was always clear I was born to be quiet so Ryan could shine. From the time we were kids, my brother was the center of every room. Loud, charming, confident. He had the kind of charisma that made teachers smile, neighbors dote, and our parents beam with pride. By the time he was in 5th grade, he was already enrolled in a gifted STEM program. Our family group chat was basically a Ryan fan club. Ryan made the robotics team. Ryan aced his math placement test. Even his missteps were celebrated. That failed science project just shows he's a risk taker. Meanwhile, I was the kid who drew on the corners of worksheets, the one who wrote stories instead of solving equations. My 3rd grade teacher once told my parents, "Elena has a beautiful imagination." My mother replied yes, but imagination doesn't pay bills. That set the tone. They didn't hate me, they just forgot me. I was easy, I didn't make noise, I didn't get in trouble. I took care of myself. By 10, I was packing my own lunch. By 12, I was doing my own laundry. By 14, I knew how to eat dinner alone without feeling hurt. I learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity, not pride. In high school, Ryan was preparing for Ivy Leagues while I was quietly selling handmade jewelry on Etsy under a pseudonym. I used the money to buy my first real sewing machine. My parents didn't even notice. My mother once walked past my desk where I had packaging supplies and materials laid out and asked, "Why is this mess here? Is this some hobby thing again?" It wasn't a hobby. It was the only thing that made me feel like I mattered. The thing is, I didn't resent Ryan. He wasn't cruel to me. In fact, when we were little, he used to let me sit beside him while he played video games. We had moments, but as we grew, the space between us widened. He started echoing my parents' tone without even realizing it. When I told him I wanted to study textile design, he laughed. "You're seriously going to major in sewing?" "No," I said quietly. "Design. It's more than just..." "Okay, but that's not a real career, right?" That was the last time I talked to him about anything that mattered. I tried to please them once. I enrolled in a local business administration program, what my dad called a safe degree. I hated every minute. The numbers blurred. The lectures felt like background noise. I dropped out after one semester and went back to working part-time at a local craft store. My parents said nothing. Not a word. It was almost worse than yelling. But there was one person who did care. Grandpa James. He wasn't warm in the conventional way. He didn't bake cookies or call every Sunday, but he saw me. And he listened. When I was 15, he gave me an old wooden cabinet from his garage and said, "Looks like you could use a place for all that thread and sparkle stuff." He called it sparkle stuff, but he took time to ask about every bracelet I made. He even wore a keychain I stitched him on his belt loop. When I apologized for how amateur it looked, he said, "Everyone starts somewhere. Don't stop, ever." He was the only one who made me feel like being different wasn't a flaw. He never said it in so many words, but I knew he was proud of me in a way no one else had ever been. After he passed, the silence in my family got louder. They didn't ask how I was feeling. They didn't talk about what he meant to me. They just moved on. And when the inheritance came, when that moment arrived where I thought for once something was going to be mine, they took it. But what hurt more than the theft was the fact that they didn't even think I'd care, as if my dreams were too small to matter, as if my life was background noise to their bigger story. They had written me off. They thought I'd stay invisible. They were wrong. When I think about love, the kind that doesn't need noise or grand gestures, I think of Grandpa James. He wasn't loud about it. He wasn't the kind of man who threw out compliments or posted about his grandkids on Facebook. But he saw me. He paid attention. And in a family that looked through me, that meant everything. He used to stop by every other Saturday, usually with a bag of groceries my mom insisted we didn't need. While she rolled her eyes at the extra eggs or flour, I saw what he was really doing. He knew I liked baking, and he was giving me an excuse to do it. He'd sit at the kitchen table while I mixed ingredients, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug, and ask, "So what are you making these days? Still those little bracelets with the tiny shells?" "Yes," I'd say. "And I'm trying embroidery now, too." He'd nod like I'd just told him I was building a rocket ship. "Good," he said once. "Use your hands. The world forgets how valuable that is." I think he saw how lonely I was. Maybe he saw parts of himself in me, quiet, observant, content, to build things slowly and privately. He had worked with his hands his whole life, carpentry, fixing things, restoring furniture in his garage. He wasn't rich, but he lived with dignity. Every object in his home had a story, and every tool had a purpose. When I was 16, I showed him a bag I had sewn myself from scraps. It wasn't perfect. The strap was a little uneven, and one seam looked like it had survived a war. But he held it like it was a designer piece. "You made this." "Yeah," I said, brushing it off. "It's not great, just practice." He handed it back gently. "Elena, don't apologize for your work. The world will do that for you. You don't need to help them." That stuck with me. After he passed away, I found that bag in his closet. Still there. Still cared for, still mine. He never liked conflict, especially not with my parents. But there were a few times I caught him challenging them. Once at dinner, my dad joked Elena's probably going to end up managing a fabric store. Grandpa didn't laugh. "She could run a business if she wanted. Don't sell her short just because she doesn't talk as loud as Ryan." The room went quiet. My mom changed the subject, but I noticed the way Grandpa's jaw clenched afterward. He didn't say more, but that look said it all. When his will was read and they announced he had left me $72,000 for creative development, I cried. Right there in the lawyer's office in front of everyone. Not because of the money, because he believed in me until the very end. I held on to that moment like it was a life raft. In a sea of silence and dismissal, that sentence was an anchor. It didn't matter how the story started. He had given me the seed. It was my job to grow it. And no one was going to take that away from me. 3 weeks after the funeral, the lawyer called to confirm that the transfer of Grandpa's gift had been processed. He said the funds would be available by the end of the month and that my parents, listed as temporary trustees, would oversee the disbursement in accordance with your grandfather's wishes. I didn't think much of that detail. I should have. A few days later, I asked my mom when I could access the money. I had already found a small business development course I wanted to take, and I was researching fabric suppliers to maybe launch a proper online shop. She barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, sweetie," she said. "We've already used it." I froze. "What?" "The money. We redirected it for Ryan's startup." I thought I misheard her. I waited for a laugh, some kind of joke, but her face was blank, casual. You, used it. Yes, my dad said from the hallway. We all talked about it and decided that it made more sense. Ryan's launch date is coming up, and Grandpa would have wanted that money to help the family. No, I said, my voice cracking. He wanted it for me. He wrote that. It was for my creative development. My mom's tone changed. Sharper now. Defensive. Elena, you don't even have a clear plan. Ryan's business could actually generate income. You want to sell crafts on the internet? That's not sustainable. I never agreed to this, I said. You didn't need to, my dad replied. We're the trustees. It was our decision. I couldn't breathe. It was like someone had knocked the wind out of me, like the floor beneath my feet was gone. I went to my room and locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed with my hands shaking. They stole from me, not just money, but belief, hope. The one gift I had been given was gone, and they didn't even think I deserved an explanation. For the next 2 days, I barely spoke. I stayed in my room. I replayed the conversation 100 times in my head, thinking maybe I had misunderstood something. But I hadn't. They saw nothing wrong with what they did. They had already decided I wasn't worth investing in, and now they'd proven it with action. That night, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. My mom was bragging about Ryan's pitch deck, how sleek it looked, how the new money would help him lease a co-working space in the city. My dad was proud already, calling it a smart family move. I wasn't part of this family. Not really. I packed a bag, just the essentials, my laptop, my sewing kit, a few outfits, the fabric Grandpa gave me the Christmas before he died, and the bag I made when I was 16, the one he kept. I left a note that simply said, "This was never about money. It was about respect. And you've shown me exactly how much I deserve." Then I left. No one called that night. No one asked where I went. It was like I had finally become what they always treated me as, invisible. But I wasn't broken. I was building something they couldn't touch. I moved into a rented room above a flower shop. The place smelled like lilies and mold. The windows stuck when you tried to open them, and the radiator made a ticking sound like it was counting down to something. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I had $400 in my bank account, a used laptop that could barely handle video calls, and no backup plan. What I did have was a shelf full of fabric, years of sketches, and a fire in my chest that hadn't stopped burning since the night I walked out. The first few weeks were the hardest. I worked part-time at a local craft supply store during the day. Minimum wage, mostly stocking yarn and cleaning up glitter spills from parents who brought their kids in to explore. After hours, I stitched. I designed. I recorded time-lapse videos on my phone. Nothing fancy, just hand-sewing, threading, creating. I stayed up most nights till 2 or 3 a.m. trying to figure out how Etsy worked, what tags to use, how to photograph items with cheap lighting. I watched YouTube tutorials while eating noodles straight from the pot. I took notes on marketing strategy on the back of old receipts. My desk was a folding table. My chair was a crate with a pillow. Orders trickled in, first from strangers, then from repeat buyers. A woman in Arizona bought 5 hand-embroidered coin purses for Christmas. A newlywed couple in Vermont ordered custom napkin rings with their initials. I cried after every review. At the end of the first month, I had made $287 in sales. It wasn't much, but it was more than anyone ever thought I could make. During my shifts at the craft store, I listened. I watched. I learned what customers asked for, what trends were coming, which materials were going out of stock the fastest. I started tracking which colors sold best, which products got saved to carts but never purchased. I created spreadsheets. I tested ideas. When I wasn't sewing, I was learning. Digital marketing, product photography, branding, email newsletters, SEO. Every mistake became a lesson. Every slow day became a chance to refine. I posted short clips on Instagram showing my process, threading needles, choosing color palettes, making small talk over lo-fi music. People started following, first dozens, then hundreds. Then I got a message from a small craft blogger asking if she could feature my shop. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. The post went live on a Sunday. By Monday night, I had 43 orders. I spent 3 straight days sewing packaging and handwriting thank you notes. My fingers were sore and my back felt like I was 90, but I didn't care. I was building something. There were days I wanted to quit, days when the numbers didn't add up and the bills stacked too high. I remember sitting in my tiny room one night looking at my overdraft balance and thinking, maybe they were right. Then I opened a drawer and saw Grandpa's old sewing scissors, the ones he gave me when I was 17. They still had his initials scratched into the handle. I held them for a long time that night. I didn't quit. Instead, I started a new product line: miniature wall hangings with quotes stitched into them, things I wish someone had said to me growing up. You are not a backup plan. Small things matter. Silence is not the same as weakness. They sold out in 2 weeks. One customer messaged me saying she gave one to her daughter who struggled with anxiety. She hung it above her bed, the message said. She reads it every morning. That was the first time I let myself believe that maybe this wasn't just a side project. Maybe this was a beginning. 3 months in, I filed the paperwork for a business license. I called it Threads of Me, a name that sounded like truth. 6 months in, I moved out of the room above the flower shop and into a small studio apartment with better light and working plumbing. My shop had grossed over $10,000 in sales. I wasn't rich, I wasn't viral, but I was free. And for the first time in my life, I was proud of what I was building. The first time someone called me a real business owner, I laughed out loud. It was a customer, a woman in her 50s, who'd ordered a custom table runner with her grandchildren's names embroidered in soft earth tones. When she came to pick it up in person, she looked around my modest studio apartment with fabric rolls stacked against the wall and a folding table covered in spools and said, "It's amazing what you've built here. You're a real businesswoman." And for the first time, I didn't argue. Because by then I wasn't just filling orders, I was running a growing brand. Within the first year, Threads of Me had developed a small but loyal following. My Etsy shop had nearly 1,500 sales. My Instagram account crossed 10,000 followers. I was featured in a local online magazine's Women Makers to Watch series. That brought in another wave of customers, mostly women like me. Quiet creatives, second daughters, women who had once been called too sensitive or not practical enough. I started receiving messages that stopped me in my tracks. My mother always made me feel like I was wasting time on crafts. Seeing your work makes me want to try again. My sister was the star in our family, too. Thank you for reminding me I'm allowed to want more. I realized this wasn't just about thread and fabric. It was about visibility, dignity, proof that soft things could still be powerful. I leaned into that message. I added a blog to my website, wrote essays about being the overlooked sibling, the underestimated girl, the quiet one in loud rooms. The posts weren't viral, but they hit home. Readers left comments like, "Did you sneak into my childhood and I cried reading this?" Around that time, I launched a YouTube channel. Just simple videos, me working at my desk, narrating my thoughts, sharing tips. I didn't have a professional camera, just my phone on a $14 tripod, and some secondhand lights I bought off Facebook Marketplace. Still, it worked. My first video, how I went from one order a week to building my full-time handmade business, got 32,000 views in a month. That video brought in subscribers. Subscribers became customers, and customers became supporters. I hired a part-time assistant named Maya, a local design student who was obsessed with color theory and had a laugh that could turn around any bad day. She helped with packaging inventory and prepping materials. Working alone had been necessary in the beginning. Now having help felt like breathing again. We moved production out of my apartment and into a small rented workspace on the edge of downtown. It wasn't fancy. One bathroom, concrete floors, flickering lights. But it was ours. I painted the walls soft blue. We hung photos of finished products and thank you notes from customers. We put a sign on the door, "Quiet girls make loud things." 6 months later, I brought on a second team member, a woman named Trisha, who had just left an exhausting corporate job in product marketing. She helped rebrand my visuals, rewrite my product descriptions, and turn my social media presence into something clean, confident, and coherent. Sales doubled. We streamlined the ordering process, upgraded the website, and launched seasonal collections. Our spring line themed soft armor sold out in 4 days. Then came the partnership inquiries. A sustainable lifestyle blogger wanted to collaborate. A subscription box service for handmade women-owned products asked for exclusive designs. Even a well-known DIY influencer reached out asking if she could feature my studio for her Makers Rising series. I said yes to the things that felt right, no to the ones that felt hollow. because I had learned something crucial by then. Just because you're invited doesn't mean you belong. And just because you weren't invited doesn't mean you're not worthy. And then something unexpected happened. A well-known lifestyle brand offered to buy threads of me. They wanted the catalog, the email list, the designs, everything. The offer was high six figures. I read their email 5 times, then I said no. Because this brand was my name, my story, my survival. You don't sell the thing that saved you. Around that time, I spoke at a small business panel hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce. I wore a blazer from a thrift store and shoes that had seen better days. The woman next to me had just landed funding from a venture capital firm. Another ran a company with 50 employees. I felt small. Then I spoke, just honestly, about being invisible for most of my life, about how I used thread to make sense of a world that didn't think I mattered, about turning heartbreak into handmade goods. And when I finished, people clapped. Some stood. Afterward, a woman in the audience hugged me and whispered, "My daughter needed to hear what you said today. Thank you." And suddenly, I didn't feel small at all. I walked home that night and stood in front of the mirror. For the first time, I liked the woman staring back at me. She looked tired, sure, but strong. She looked like someone who had built something out of nothing. And I thought, Grandpa, I hope you see me now. It had been nearly 3 years since I walked out of my parents' house with nothing but a duffel bag and a box of thread. In that time, I'd grown a brand, hired a team, built a community, and proved to myself that I was capable of more than anyone ever gave me credit for. I had not spoken to my family since the day I left, until the email came. It was from my mother. Subject line, "Please read." My hand hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won. The message was short. "Elena, we've hit some difficult times. Ryan's startup didn't go as planned. We're underwater on the second mortgage and facing foreclosure. I know things were said in the past, but we're still a family. We could really use your help." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I read it again and again. They had mortgaged the house to support Ryan further. With what the leftover inheritance they stole from me wasn't enough. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete the email either. A week later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It was my father. "Elena, I know you're still angry. I don't blame you. But we could really use your support. The bank is breathing down our necks. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Please just come by. Let's talk. As a family." I didn't respond to that either, but part of me wanted to look them in the eye. Not to argue, not to help, but to finally say the things I never got to say. So I went. I pulled up to the same house I'd grown up in, but it looked different now. The lawn was overgrown. The paint on the porch was chipped. The once pristine flower beds were filled with weeds. The golden home had dulled. I knocked. My mother answered the door, surprised to see me. She forced a smile. "You look well." Inside, my dad was sitting at the kitchen table. Ryan was there too, thinner, less sure of himself. There was a tension in the room, like everyone was trying to pretend this wasn't the first time we'd been together in years. They offered me coffee. I declined. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, my father cleared his throat. "We're in a tough spot. Ryan's business didn't pan out the way we'd hoped. We made some investments that didn't return. The house is at risk. We've been covering debt for a while now, and well, we heard you're doing well. You've always been smart, Elena. Maybe you could help us bridge the gap until we're back on our feet." I set my bag down, slowly, calmly. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You took the money Grandpa left for me. You used it for Ryan's business without my consent. Then when that wasn't enough, you mortgaged this house to keep that business afloat. And now that it's collapsed, you're asking me to save you." My mother blinked. "It's not that simple." "No," I said. "It's exactly that simple." Ryan spoke up for the first time. "Look, I didn't know the money was meant for you. Mom and Dad just said they had a family fund. I didn't ask questions. I was young, I made mistakes. You were 28, I said flatly. Same age I was when I started over with nothing." Silence. My dad exhaled. "Family helps family." I looked at him. I looked at the table where we'd once sat in silence while Ryan's achievements were celebrated and my handmade gifts were ignored. I looked at the faces that had once dismissed every dream I ever had. I remember asking you both for support, I said quietly. I remember showing you my work. I remember being told it wasn't a real future. My mother started to interrupt. I held up my hand. You told me I was wasting my time. You took my inheritance and called it a business decision. You didn't believe in me when it mattered. I stood up. I believe in boundaries now. I believe in walking away from people who only see your worth when they need something. Ryan looked down. My father's eyes welled up. My mother tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. I'm not angry anymore, I said. I'm done being angry. I just don't owe you anything. And then I left. I didn't slam the door, I didn't cry, I didn't look back. I just walked into the sunlight free. After I walked out of my parents' house, I expected to feel rage, vindication, something loud and dramatic, but instead I felt still, like I had finally put down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. They didn't chase after me, they didn't call, and I didn't expect them to. That conversation had been the final chapter I never got as a child, the one where I finally said, I am enough, and I do not need your permission to exist. I went back to the studio the next morning and stitched for hours. Not because I had orders to fill, but because I needed to feel my hands moving, to feel grounded again. Creating had always been the way I stitched myself back together. Maya noticed something different in me that day. You seem lighter, she said. I let go of something I replied. Weeks passed, then months. I continued growing threads of me. We released a fall collection titled What Was Never Said, featuring quotes from real customers about the things they needed to hear growing up. It sold out in 10 days. We hosted a small event in our studio space. A dozen women sat in a circle surrounded by fabrics and warm tea. Some of them cried as they shared how creativity had helped them process childhood wounds, family rejection, self-doubt. It was soft and powerful, and exactly what I wanted my work to become, a place for people like me to feel seen. Then something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail. It was from Ryan, handwritten. He didn't ask for money. He didn't defend his actions. He just said he was sorry. He told me he had spent a lot of time reflecting since the business failed, that he realized he had lived most of his life with blinders on, that he had never asked what I wanted or what I needed because he had been taught by our parents and by success that he didn't have to. I know I can't undo what was done, the letter read, but if you're ever open to it, I'd like to start again. As your brother, not as the favorite. I read that letter 5 times, and then I wrote back. A short note, nothing emotional, just honest. I'm open to rebuilding something, but not through our parents, just you and me. Slowly. He replied a week later, and we started talking. Just texts at first, then calls. Eventually we met for coffee. He wasn't the same golden boy anymore. Failure had stripped away the arrogance. He looked tired but real. For the first time in our adult lives, we talked like equals. He asked about my business. I told him about the studio, the team, the late nights, the first viral product. He listened, really listened. I'm proud of you, he said once quietly. And I'm sorry it took me so long to say that. We weren't best friends overnight, but we were building something new, something without comparison or competition, just truth. He even came to our next studio event and sat in the back quietly helping fold brochures. When someone asked who he was, he smiled and said, just her brother, here to support. That meant more than I can explain. I never reconnected with my parents. They tried a few more times, emails, a voicemail from my mother on Thanksgiving, a birthday card with no return address. But I never responded. I wasn't angry. I had just outgrown the version of myself that needed their approval. I no longer needed them to say sorry for me to feel whole. Instead, I focused on what came next. I bought a small house 2 hours outside the city. It had a big porch, wild lavender in the backyard, and an old barn I turned into a creative studio. The front room was filled with light. The back room I turned into a classroom for girls who had been told they were too quiet, too emotional, too soft. Every month I hosted free workshops for teens from underfunded schools. They came to sew, paint, write, and share. We called it the quiet room because some of the most powerful things in the world are born in silence. One day, a girl named Lila came in no older than 13. She barely spoke, just kept her hoodie up and looked down. But when I handed her a needle and fabric, her hands worked like they had known thread forever. She stitched a small square with just one line: "You are not an afterthought." I kept that piece because that was me once, and now I got to be the voice I never had, the support I never got, the proof that quiet girls rise. I used to think justice looked like revenge, a dramatic confrontation, a mic drop, a spotlight moment where the people who hurt you are forced to admit they were wrong. But justice, real justice, is much quieter. It looks like waking up in a home you chose. It sounds like your name being spoken with respect. It feels like peace in your chest, where the ache used to be. I spent years trying to be enough for a family that had already decided who I was. Years believing love had to be earned, that silence was safer than truth. Years making myself small so others could shine. But here's what I've learned. Being the overlooked one doesn't mean you are invisible. It just means they weren't looking in the right direction. Sometimes the apology never comes. Sometimes the people who were supposed to love you will never see the damage they caused. And sometimes you have to let them go anyway. Not for them, for you. Because your story isn't theirs to hold hostage. Your success isn't something they get to take credit for. And your healing, that's yours alone. The real revenge I found is in building a life so full, so honest, so rooted in your own values, that their absence improves it. It's in becoming the person you needed when you were younger. I used to wonder what my life would have looked like if my parents had believed in me. Now I understand it wasn't their belief I needed, it was my own. And once I found it, there was no going back. So to anyone out there who's been told you're too soft, too strange, too sensitive, or too small, you're not. You're just waiting to bloom in a place that knows how to hold you. I bloomed late, but I bloomed anyway.